Well, thanks very much, Stephen, for a very generous introduction there. And can I, of course, acknowledge we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. It's a great honour to be sharing the stage too with John Brumby, one of our great economic reformers, and Jeremy Thorpe, one of the sort of deep thinkers in Australia around the issue of tax. I think some people find tax eye-glazingly dull. I've been doing nothing else but looking forward to talking to you about tax all week. And the only dispute we've had so far was John suggesting that the improvement that could be made to CEDA was by moving this conference to Melbourne. I, of course, as a proud Canberran, think this is an outrageous suggestion. But I can't help noticing that, you know, when I look up at this audience, you're either all on the left or all on the right. And maybe if you're in Melbourne, you'd all be sort of more towards the centre there. Maybe it's a Canberra thing. I wanted to talk today about the economics, politics and future of multinational taxation. A topic which I think has received too little attention in our political debate, but which I think is increasingly going to grow in importance. How many people have seen the movie The Terminal with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Tom Hanks? So The Terminal is about a man who's stuck in JFK Airport. He's effectively stateless as a result of the fact that the country he came from won't take him and the country he's arrived in won't let him in. And as a result of some very careful congressional questioning last year, it was discovered that a major technology company, I won't say which, but they do produce some good products, had as one of its major income generating entities an entity that was effectively stateless. Like the protagonist in The Terminal, this tax-paying entity didn't pay tax anywhere because there wasn't a nation to claim it. And as a result, significant amounts of revenue were being lost. Multinational profit shifting has seen the emergence of the double Dutch Irish sandwich, a concoction that sounds far more delicious when you say it than it is for the taxpayers that have to eat it, or in this case, don't get to eat it. For those of you who are coming afresh to the topic, let me briefly explain how multinational profit shifting can work. Suppose you've got an offshoot in a low tax jurisdiction and you want to shift $1 million to that from Australia to that low tax jurisdiction. One simple way of doing it is to have the low tax jurisdiction sell Australia a paperclip for the value of $1 million. A paperclip is now shifted to Australia and $1 million of profits is shifted to that entity. Another, slightly more complicated, is to have the low tax entity make a loan to the Australian entity, say for $10 million. The Australian entity then pays interest at a rate of 10% a year, allowing a $1 million a year deduction for the Australian entity. Again, shifting profits to the low tax jurisdiction. While Labor was in government, we put in place a significant package spearheaded by Wayne Swan and put together by David Bradbury, who's now taken up a senior job at the OECD in charge of tax. And it was aimed at closing some of those loopholes. And while I'm pleased to see that the incoming government has pursued in principle the agenda on multinational profit shifting, I've been troubled by their legislative actions. While the government has gone to the G20 and said that it is a priority to deal with multinational profit shifting, their only actions have been, one by one, to reverse parts of that package. We're now up to a cumulative $1.1 billion in multinational profit shifting measures announced by Labor and reversed by the government. These include measures around Section 2590 and offshore banking units, and it all amounts to $1.1 billion that has to come from somewhere else. As all of you in the room know, less tax revenue means one of three things. We take on more debt, we have lower services, or someone else pays more tax. And so it's fundamental that we have in place fair rules around multinational profit shifting. And not just to shore up the revenue base, but because of the perverse incentives that loopholes can cause. Good tax reform involves broadening the base and lowering the rate. But if we're to aspire to a lower rate of company tax, as Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen has clearly said that Labor does, then one of the key elements of that is going to be addressing multinational profit shifting. If we don't tackle multinational profit shifting, we're creating distortions in the market. Small companies will be outperformed by large companies which are able to do the profit shifting. And companies in industries more amenable to profit shifting will gain an unfair advantage over corner stores, hairdressers, brick manufacturers, the nature of whose business means that they're less able to shift profits offshore. Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, had an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago in which he argued that software is going to take over the world. And he pointed to a range of things that we do every day. If we're communicating with our friends, increasingly now we're doing so through software rather than telephone and letter. If we're carrying out financial transactions, almost invariably software is behind them. If you're a farmer, increasingly software is telling you when to plant, where to plant, and even what to plant, with better use of crop modelling and satellite data. If you're on the battlefield, Australian soldiers are being kept alive thanks in large part to software. And if you're a mechanic, where decades ago you would have been pulling out tools to bash bits of the car back into shape or replacement parts, these days often you'll be downloading a new software update for one of the hundreds of onboard computers. The software revolution is fundamentally changing business models across the world. And there's businesses like health and education, where it's only just starting to come in but will potentially be utterly revolutionary. But software has huge implications for our tax base, because as we start delivering education and health services online, the physical location of those companies matters less and less. That means we need fair arrangements to work globally to tackle profit shifting. But it also places the onus on Australian governments not to keep open loopholes that allow profit shifting. Profit shifting matters a lot now, $1.1 billion. But it'll matter even more in the future. If we get this wrong, it's in some sense a fork in the road, a moment from which we will struggle as policymakers to recover as we see increasing amounts of revenue going to industries which can move production around the world. So I think we need to get our heads around profit shifting, and what's striking to me is the growing interest in this conversation. I've just come from speaking to a group of Micah Challenge volunteers. They're young people from churches all around Australia who in previous years have come to Parliament House to talk about increases in overseas aid and how to make aid more effective. But this year they're in the building and they've had 114 meetings with parliamentarians to talk about base erosion and profit shifting. So teenagers and 20-somethings from around Australia are gathered here in Parliament, just as business leaders and policy entrepreneurs like yourselves are, to talk about the important issue of profit shifting. We need to get it right because our tax system needs to be simple, efficient and equitable. and we can't do any of those things if we don't close loopholes around multinational profit shifting. Thank you very much for being here today. I've always enjoyed my engagement with CEDA, one of the great intellectual powerhouses in Australian public policy. I'm not sure the long name any longer fits what you do. A Committee for Economic Development sounds a little bit more like old-fashioned status planning, but the ideas that come out of CEDA are always thought-provoking, and I'm looking forward very much to the conversation today. Thank you.